Americans get their news primarily through digital platforms and the television. So, a little over half of Americans get their news from TV, and that also depends on age demographic. The older you are, the more likely you are to watch TV. 72% are ages 50 to 64, 85% are 65 plus, and 27% are ages 18 to 29, meaning that the younger demographic tends to get their news from elsewhere, such as digital platforms and social media. And 62% of Americans now get their news from social media, showing that social media has been shaping the way that we get our news and how people consume it. And 72% of Americans view their news on a phone, also showing how technology has shaped the way that Americans consume news and find it. And because mobile phones have become such an easy tool for people to get information and send information, news has also taken advantage of that. And many people now have access to it through their mobile phones. And print newspaper has declining rapidly in comparison to the screen and online. So only 2 in 10 Americans read the newspaper, but newspapers online, such as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, who all have websites, have been growing rapidly in traffic. So social media is very important when it comes to Americans and how they get their news. 2/3 of Facebook users get news from the site, and this means that almost half of the US population gets their news from Facebook, since Facebook users account for 67% of the American population. 59% of Twitter users get news on Twitter, and other apps like Snapchat have implemented news into their interface. So Snapchat has their Discover feature, which gives users the ability to quickly scan through different news sites such as CNN and ESPN and Good Luck America and BuzzFeed, and this allows them to watch the news or read about it when they're on Snapchat. But even though social media is so easy to find information on and it's so easy to get the news on social media, only 4% of Americans trust the information they find there, and only 7% trust the news that they find here. So while this means that social media is a very good source for getting information, it's not necessarily deemed reliable by Americans. And so in the US, we have different news media outlets and public service outlets. The two main public service outlets are Public Service Broadcasting, PBS, and National Public Radio, or NPR. They are publicly and privately funded nonprofit organizations, and they are funded not only by the government but also by the viewers, politicians, privately owned companies, and nonprofit corporations and all these combine to mesh funds together for NPR and PBS. So NPR reaches an audience of over 30 million with over 1,000 stations nationwide. But despite this high audience number, most of NPR's listeners are located in blue states, and there is not one state and only one main city really stands out as being in a red state or a more Republican or conservative state. Still, NPR does have satellite locations around the world, which allows them to have international coverage, and they are dedicated to having unbiased, independent reporting that gives out a voice to the marginalized and to different communities, both in America and around the world. So their products, according to their website, their mission statement is that our products are unbiased and independent information, perspectives, and entertainment. And when it comes to online newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal are among the most popular. USA Today and New York Times reached over 2 million people in 2016, and Wall Street Journal reached over 1 million. By having these different sources, people are able to choose what newspaper they want to read and whether or not they would want to get their sources from a newspaper or a cable. In addition, the American broadcasting companies have also been consistently popular with Americans, and CNN and Fox saw a jump in viewers during and following the 2017 election. CNN rose by 77% and Fox by 36%. However, most broadcasting companies are owned by private corporations, meaning that they must also care about marketing and profit, and what will reach out to audiences in order to keep their interest. And many Americans see journalists of most major media outlets as leaning towards the left, which has been criticized also by journalists and the public audience alike. But for example, other media outlets have been seen as leaning consistently right, such as Fox, who has been consistently reaching towards a more conservative audience compared to cable networks like CNN and ABC. The election and politics have also been covered really highly by news broadcasts because it was such a polarizing election that it really showed how divided America was and how journalism affects politics. And with the rise of alternative facts and fake news, which have been blasted over headlines so many times in the past year, Americans have been really testing their trust in the news media. And this brings me to news media bias and inaccuracy. So the United States has a reputation for biased news, with most perceived as siding with the liberal left. Only 22% of Americans trust the news. Of this group, 15% is Republican, 13% are independent, and 27% are Democratic. Democrats and liberals are more likely to trust the news than conservatives, and conservatives are more likely to see the news as one-sided. They are also more likely to be skeptical of the news, and 64% of Americans see the news as more biased towards the Democratic Party. Because we have this bias in the United States and in journalism for Americans, it doesn't allow people to properly judge with an open mind, and in order to expose themselves to more than one side or one political ideology, they really have to look for it. And if we can't trust the sources that we have, then we deserve better journalism and better news reporting. So these graphics here show exactly how polarizing American politics are in journalism. So on one side you have a more liberal background with articles that have been mostly shared and responded to by liberals and those who lean towards the left. On the right side you have the conservative one, which shows articles that have been shared mostly by conservatives. There are clear contrasts in these article headlines, such as the liberal side demeaning Trump while the conservative side saying to defund Planned Parenthood. In addition, the liberal side talks about gun culture much differently from the conservative side, which calls for keeping the Second Amendment and for keeping guns legal, while the liberal side doesn't really want that.